Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ray Makela, and welcome to the SBI Growth Podcast. Thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Howard Dover from the University of Texas, Dallas, and the director of the Center for Professional Sales. And today we're going to dive into a discussion around generative AI and the use of AI in a practical sales mode. And we have, I think, some great discussion questions that allow us to explore that. But before we do that, Dr. Dover, again, thanks for joining me today. I'd love to have you just introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about the program that you're running there.
Sure. First, thanks for having me. And SBI is a great company, and you guys got a wonderful facility here in Dallas that I've been to a few times. So, yeah, we're kind of a very niche program that is focused on developing top performers using a lot of technology. I think I've decided that I'm a sales technologist because nobody knows what that means. But in academia, it means that I study the impact of technology on sales. And so I've done some work and research on sales enablement, which is probably where you and I have kind of got to know each other through Sales Enablement Society. But my focal point has really been how technology is impacting our ability for efficiency and effectiveness. And that's kind of my area of focus, and also where we tend to lean because I teach some of the upper division classes and the master's classes. So that also tends to be the focus of UT Dallas in our sales area.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great stepping off point because, as I was reviewing again and looking back through the Sales Innovation Paradox, the book that you published last year, right? Maybe 2 years ago. This really fits right into that discussion, which is another exciting technology that may or may not produce the results that we're looking for, right? And so when we think about AI and the promise that it has, I think we're already seeing some frustrations about how do we really get the ROI and what does it look like to use it effectively. But let's start there. Maybe you'd like to talk about, what you're seeing there and some of the challenges.
Well, I think the key, the subtitle is always the interesting piece, because harnessing technology is where we get exponential performance. And so if we can harness the technology, we actually don't have a paradox. But the challenge that we see in the most part out in the field is we see poor adoption, poor use, and so we see a paradox that we've deployed all this technology, and yet we've hired a whole bunch of people to do the job. That is a paradox. Economic principles state that if I got really, really good at the job, I really got efficient, then I actually don't hire as many people. But we actually hired more people while we even got better at the job, and yet our numbers still got really bad. In fact, they're really, really bad right now. We've had massive layoffs that have occurred. This is probably an interesting point to kind of drop this little fact bomb. So over the last 18 months in the U.S., we've had a 2 million headcount reduction in sales in the 20 major markets. So Dallas alone has lost 120,000 sales jobs in the last 18 months. So truly, we are in a bubble pop moment. So the innovation paradox has played its way out. Now, because we don't have zero interest rate environments, we actually have money that costs. When we take out loans and we get money, we actually have people who want returns on investment. So now all of a sudden we have to get something done with our investments. And now all of a sudden people are pulling back those investments, and we're seeing massive layoffs in the sales space. So we are actually seeing exactly what I thought we would in the book, that it wasn't sustainable. And so now we're in this new era that says, how do we harness technology to increase performance? And I think we can. And at UT Dallas, we do. So we've seen where it can be done, but it's kind of tricky.
Well, and I think, and we'll get to that, it has a lot to do with how the technology is positioned and the change management that goes along with it and the adoption and, some of the things we want to get into talking about AI. And I think that's a really specific area, which is, as we're trying to get more done with less, right? And as you know, with SBI, we very much focused on how do we improve that talent productivity without adding more
Right.
headcount. Which do we have the right people with the right skills and the right roles doing the right things? And AI certainly has that promise, but I think one of the things we're seeing is maybe that promise of, oh, it's going to help improve efficiency and automation, and it's going to make us much more effective, but maybe not as much focus on being effective and helping salespeople be more curious and more productive. Can you comment on that, kind of paradox of, between trying to speed things up, but doing the right things, being efficient versus effective?
I think the use cases that I've seen that have been the most impressive have usually been that the organization is laser focused on the effectiveness game, and then they add the efficiency game. Where I've seen challenges is where the company has focused on the efficiency game and they're not measuring the effectiveness game. So, for example, right, I see that by deploying a piece of technology where I could get maybe 2 appointments before I can now get 4 appointments. So I immediately deploy the technology because of the efficiency. What I often don't check is upstream, right? Or downstream in this case is what's my closing ratio? Is the ICP still holding? Are my deal sizes correct? And actually what you find sometimes is that early level movement actually ends up with destroying your effectiveness. Had one guy call me up. This was pre-COVID. I think of the world as pre-blip, post-blip for all of you Marvel fans. That's what I'm calling the COVID years is the blip, right? So pre-blip, pre-COVID, I had an executive call me up and say, hey, we're really dropping off in efficacy in our outbound efforts. And I said, great. Well, here's some ideas with technology. I said, but don't deploy it right away. You need to rethink the way you do the motions. You don't just keep doing the old motions with new technology. You've got to rethink how you do it. And he said, yeah. And didn't talk to me for like 18 months. Calls me back up and says, hey, we're screwed up. And I said, you deployed the technology, didn't you? And he said, we did. And I said, what happened? He said, well, at the first, it was great. We had a 20, 30% bump, and everybody thought it was great. And I'm thinking you could have had a 200 to 300% bump. You only got a 20% bump. And he said, well, the inbound was phenomenal. He said, we had the top of funnel exploded, but we only got 20%. Now we're worse off than when we started. Well, he had already burned up his white space. He went out to the total addressable market without a good strategy and just obliterated, just clear cut a forest, and then said, oh, wait a minute, there's no lumber left. Not shocking, right? But we see this over and over again, whereas we see other companies who get it right and then amplify. And that's exciting. When you see that kind of a company, you see exponential performance in numbers that make you shake your head. And actually, most people don't believe it's real. They'll say, oh, there's no way you could double, triple, quadruple, 8 times your performance numbers. Well, yes, you can. When you harness the technology first, then you scale. And then you don't have to scale as much, which is pretty amazing. But unfortunately, we have a lot of leaders that over the last 10 to 15 years, in a manic phase of investment, have been able to just build the classic sales machine. And so they know how to build it, and so they build it. And then they add technology onto it. And that's where we're stuck. There's a vast majority of the market is sitting in that space.
Well, and I think it's a classic, right? Going back to my early Accenture days, re-engineering projects of, do we have the process right first before we try to automate it?
Yeah.
And especially with AI, I think there's so much focus on the front end of the funnel without thinking about the low-hanging fruit of leveraging it throughout the whole sales process. So how do we, and I think that's really our focus areas, how do we use it to create better sales conversations and better sales professionals, not just create better outbound scripts, right? Or create more spam, which who needs that, right? We've all seen that. But how do we embed it?
But Ray, we can do mass personalization right now.
Yeah, and I think you have some experience with that, right? Of creating mass outbound, but then maybe not getting the pull through and the close rates that you were expecting, right?
Well, I think what's amazing is, yes, we can do mass personalization right now, but also we can do strategic strikes, and that's actually quite interesting when you think about it. If I know strategic strikes, I can actually use the technology to, and some of this is not generative, by the way. Some of it is just straight AI. I think that's the first thing I would want to point out to everybody is we all got excited about AI because ChatGPT did cool stuff. Um, AI has been around for a while. The ability to figure out intent is not generative, it's machine learning. The ability to do predictive discs and understand some of the challenger customer work on the different dynamics of who's actually driving the decision forward. That can be mapped back to personality profiles. If anybody wants to look into it, Scott Gillum is doing some interesting work from Carbon Design on this. And you can literally do seeding of the message, but you can also get deals unstuck because you're using predictive disc. And when you look at some of the work from the people over at from Matt Dixon's work and Ray, and Ted McKenna, this idea that we maybe need to judge who's capable of even making a decision, of even changing. Organizational change may or may not be possible with the composition of the team having the wrong personalities, which, before you say, now, Ray's been around long enough, I've been around long enough that we maybe say, well, yeah, but if you're really seasoned, you already know all this stuff. But what if you're not really seasoned? Now you can be augmented with all of this information without ever meeting the team, which is very, very interesting and creates all types of opportunity. But then it comes back to the fundamental challenge of, do we have the talent that can do that work?
We have the right people in the right seats with the right skills. Yeah.
And are there new skills, or are they old skills that we just need to revitalize?
Well, and one of the things I'm excited about is I think it is going to help shine a spotlight on that level of performance. In other words, we'll be able to see who's breaking out and kind of getting it right and who's struggling. And instead of having to do that kind of one at a time, we can start to aggregate and we can look across the team. So I think some of that performance analysis is going to be really interesting. I'm curious in terms of training and enabling the organization, because I know you both work with your students and with other organizations. What are some of the challenges you see with getting them to adopt it consistently? And even, some of the basics of prompt engineering, do they all need to learn that, or eventually is that going to be automated for them? I mean, how do we get it more embedded and take advantage of it?
Well, I'm going to harp on this a few times. I think one of the things for people to realize is that there's AI like conversation intelligence and predictive and machine learning, and that doesn't really require a lot of prompt engineering, right? That's a machine learning. It's where we take generative and bring and meld the machine learning into the generative that we get into some really powerful concepts. And as you dive deeper into this, there's some really fascinating work being done around the world that is much more powerful than the generative playthings we're toying around with right now. And so as we move into integrating different technologies, we literally can leapfrog a lot of the things we think only a human can do today. But right now we're kind of playing with a tool. There was a colleague that I was on a webinar last summer from Berlin who has the contract for MIT to do collective intelligence. And he was kind of talking about, he said, I think it's cute that all of you think ChatGPT is fun. He said, we've been trying to do things for years, but we were afraid that you all were scared of AI. So we've kind of been moving slow. He said, now all of you are playing with the kindergarten toys. We can actually release some of the stuff we've been working on because now you think it's cool, whereas before you thought it was scary. And that was a moment where I started saying, wow, the capability is really quite endless. And I think with the recent release of ChatGPT 4.0 and some of the voice concepts, some of the avatar work that's being done by some of the video companies, that soon it's going to be that I'm going to have a conversation with you, with the AI tool, with my AI assistant. And I really like, there's something Ryan Botts, he's there in Silicon Slopes. He just got a new CSO position. I forget the company. But Ryan talked about the fact that he isn't hiring SDRs anymore. He's hiring what he calls an SDO. This is a sales development operator who operates with the technology to do the work that used to be done by SDRs. And so that person is harnessing all the different technological advances. See, one of the challenges we face when we try to do innovation in sales is that we're worrying about the adoption, the training and the adoption of the massive organization. But if you look at that and say, hey, top of funnel can be streamlined, then we don't have an adoption problem. Because if your BDO is doing the work of 10 SDRs, we only need five SDOs, and they all have to operate based off of operational principles, efficiency and effectiveness of their database. They're a data-driven operator. They're not a behavioral problem. But when we've got 50 sales reps that are trying to figure out how to be motivated, then we've got an adoption.
Right. Well, and it goes back to, can we model what's appropriate? And AI can certainly help accelerate that to figure out the best scripts, right? And the personalization at mass, and what do we do? What's the formula that works? But it can do that and iterate so much quicker than I think we are able to enable those, 5 SDOs with the information that they need.
Well, and I think the other thing that is interesting there is that our challenge is that the current AI, when you look at a Lavender, for example, or you look at an XIQ, or even ChatGPT, if you want to go to raw generative AI, that the ability of that platform to learn from the feedback it's getting from millions of emails that go out, it's better than average. And right now, when you look at the quota attainment numbers that are occurring in outbound, it's not better than average. In fact, most of our outbound efforts are below average. So this is our challenge, right? Is the human is not above average, but the AI has become collectively above average. And if you add machine learning to that, it will become well above average very quickly. And so some of the companies are actually melding the learning with the generative and then leapfrogging by leaps and bounds. So I think we have to kind of look at what's the future of the role. Where are humans going to still be necessary? And by the way, I'm a huge believer that sales isn't going away, but the digitization of the field is going to change what we do.
Well, and I like, and I don't know if it's really Satya's vision or Microsoft in general, but Satya Nadella from Microsoft talking about, if it enables us to outsource the mundane and the boring tasks and those repetitive, and frees us up, it does allow us to be more human, right? To be more curious, to spend the time building relationships, to really understand our customer, and overlay the human factor on top of that to become even more effective. I think that's
well, and as I was talking about before, this concept of precision. Precision on the jobs to be done framework and where the buyer is in the journey, precision on the personality that I should be working with to find a mobilizer, to find someone who can actually move the needle internally, to understand that I can work on some of the more complex concepts of complex deals with augmentation coming from a lot of different sources. Uh, that allows us to, once again, assign some of these mundane, as you just point out, mundane tasks to kind of back to marketing, I think, or in sales, right? Once again, the SDO marketing space. I think there's just going to be a lot of movement there. But what I'm really worried about and what we found at UT Dallas is as we deployed these things, we had huge success rates in some of the KPIs. And then we saw horrible closing rates. So we actually fell backwards with using the AI. And there's a story that really sums this up. So there's this young man. He was probably not the sharpest kid in the class. So I want to paint that picture to say that there's an element there. So he went in, and during that, this was a year ago, right after ChatGPT came out, we said, we just got access to Lavender, we had XIQ, and we just got ChatGPT. So we said, all right, what we want you to do is go to ChatGPT and ask it, what does Ray think about when he wakes up in the morning? I give it the role, give it you, and then I go over to XIQ and I get your personality profile and anything it'll tell me. And then I ask ChatGPT to write an email with that information, and then I move it over to Lavender so it cleans it up, makes it more concise and more likely for you to respond. So this kid comes up to me and he says, hey, do you know who the head of Travelers Commercial Insurance is? And I said, well, remember, this is one of my kids I'm not quite sure about. So I said, well, I know what Travelers is. I know what commercial is. So I think what you're asking me is, do I know that there's a commercial division of Travelers that sells to B2B? Is that what you're asking me? And he said, yes, that's it. And I said, okay, great. He said, did you know that the director lives in Dallas? I said, I didn't know that. And he said, well, I did exactly as you asked. And he asked for a meeting next Tuesday and said, I'm probably one of the most intelligent people he's ever heard from. So I'm like, well, congratulations. You got the KPI, which is deliverable. The deliverable is get the meeting in the SDR space. So he gets the meeting. The kid seems to not want to talk to me for about 2 weeks. And I don't know if that was on purpose, but I run into him finally and I said, hey, how did that meeting go with the commercial director of Travelers Insurance? And he said, oh, it didn't go well. And I said, well, what happened? He said, he hung up on me. And I said, well, why did he hang up on you? He said, he said I was wasting his time. And I said, how did that happen? And he said, I don't know. I just tried to talk to him. See, what happened is that he used AI to augment his capacity to ignite interest in a director and a senior level person who said, anybody who can talk to me like that, I want to meet. What did he want to meet? He wanted to meet the collective intelligence that created that email. Who did he meet? He met a student who didn't know how to ask any questions.
Yeah. Well,
and so this is the challenge, right? We're going to augment, and then we're going to find ourselves woefully inadequate in the moment.
Well, and I would hope, if the anecdote to that story is, what could he have done in leveraging Gen AI to build out his call plan and go to school on that company? And I mean, one of the things we're talking about is, hey, how do they make money? And, do a pest analysis, right? What's going on politically, economically, socially, technologically that I should know about? And what does, this person care about related to whatever it is that we're offering? I mean, he could have come in so much more prepared with another 15 minutes of preparation, right?
Well, and I think what we've been, ever since those moments, we actually have been working on what we call business acumen. So I think I agree with you, and you and I have an experience set that when you say those words, I know what you mean. And I know how important they are to have a really good conversation with somebody.
Well, Dr. Dover, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet today and dive into this in quite a bit of detail, and appreciate all of your insights that you've shared. Again, look forward to continuing our discussion. Good luck with everything that you're doing at UT Dallas, and look forward to future conversations. Thank you.